I'm Julie Amundson, and I lead the ML platform experience team at Netflix. Today, I want to talk about why it's really important that you have ML practitioners on your ML infrastructure team. This is Megan Devine. She is a psychotherapist, and since 2001, she's treated countless patients in grief. In 2009, her husband drowned right before her eyes, and it ripped her world apart. In her grief, Megan discovered that the things she was telling her patients simply weren't true. There was a huge gulf between the way that others treated her and what she experienced. She was treated as if her grief was a problem to solve, but she realized it wasn't a problem. It was part of her love for her husband. She was also told that grief had distinct stages and that she needed to move through these stages so that she can get better. Her truth, though, was that grief was here to stay, and she eventually built a life that could hold it. She was also told things like, well, there's silver linings. This is going to make you stronger. At least you had all these years together. He would want you to be happy. But the truth was, her loss really was as bad as it felt, and denying that would only increase her suffering. So Megan eventually wrote a book distilling these learnings. That book was called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. She remarked that no amount of talking to her patients all those years helped her build a more accurate or effective practice around grief. By experiencing grief herself, she found an authentic way to frame it and help her patients find her companionship in grief. Why am I talking about grief in an ML infrastructure talk? Because we often make the same mistake that Megan did in building ML infrastructure. We approach the problem by talking with ML practitioners about their problems. We formulate theories about how they work and how to solve their problems, and then we provide solutions. On the surface, this seems like a great model. But if we limit our understanding of how ML practitioners work to talking to them or even looking at their code, we're bound to be solving the wrong problems. Engineers were naturally motivated to solve problems. That's not the issue. The issue is solving the problems that matter most. And the best way so far I've seen to do that on an ML infrastructure team is to make sure that we're walking in the shoes of ML practitioners. That means doing the practice ourselves. I believe this works because I've seen it in practice as we built Metaflow, which was a project that started back in 2017 at Netflix with a fairly simple but expansive mission. We want to enable the humans who are doing data science to focus on data science and not infrastructure. It worked because within 2 years, we had hundreds of projects using Metaflow at Netflix. And by 2019, we open sourced it. And now in 2022, it's being used at dozens of companies spanning multiple industries. And we started Metaflow on this principle: walk in the shoes of our users and feel their pain. The recipe, while it looks simple on this slide, is actually very difficult to implement, and the devil's always in the details. In essence, though, we first needed to choose who our users were: data scientists at Netflix. We needed to talk to as many of them as possible. Then we needed to select a few whose day-to-day life and whose pain kind of appeared to be representative of the population. And then we didn't stop there. We needed to dig in and actually work side by side with these folks and help them be successful. And only in putting on their shoes could we find what was the real problems that they were trying to solve. We had to go beyond this though, because we're an infrastructure team, we're not a service team. And we do need to scale the learnings. I can't fit this into a 15-minute talk, but we need to take those learnings and really hypothesize, okay, how do we take what we learn and help as many people as possible? How can we take this solution that we built and turn it into generalized infrastructure? And then we need to test the hypothesis by enabling as many users as possible on that solution. And this is a very much iterative process. I want to dive a little more deeply into this topic with my colleague, David Berg, who is an engineer on the ML platform team. David, can you briefly introduce yourself and your work here?
Hey folks, I'm David Berg. I work on the machine learning platform at Netflix. I've been doing this here for about 4+ years and longer elsewhere. And we're mainly working on the software Metaflow.
Great. Well, can you tell us about a time that you worked with a user of Metaflow and embedded with their project?
Yeah, well, it's something I do quite frequently, but I'll tell you about one particular one, which was quite fun for me. So we had some users that were interested in replacing their Spark pipeline for a machine learning project with Metaflow. And the reason they wanted to do this was to get the flexibility of doing things in Python versus Spark so that they could have faster iteration time. And it was particularly interesting because it was a project that required processing of billions of rows. So it was a massively parallel kind of data problem.
Can you talk about why it's important when you're working with a user that you need to directly feel their pain as opposed to just kind of talk them through the problem?
Yeah, it's a good question, Julie. Well, I think that something that's been said many times, but often not very well appreciated, is that you gain a lot of mileage by stepping into someone else's shoes. And in the context of infrastructure, what that means is to actually feel the rough edges, which are sometimes like small paper cuts. So it's not obvious to you that they're problematic, like when you just look at something or talk with someone. And so actually experiencing the sum of all these paper cuts by trying to do the problem yourself is quite informative. And I think there's another point too that's fairly subtle, which is that oftentimes engineers don't have much stake in the results. So in infrastructure, we are like a second tier team to support the data scientists. So working on a project directly with them where their success equates to your success helps you get some stake in the game. And for myself, it helps me really embed deeply in the problems that they're having.
Amazing. Can you share maybe some examples of things that you learned or insights that you had by really walking in the user's shoes that you wouldn't have learned if you had just had a conversation with them or looked at their code?
Yeah, well, one thing that came up in this project is that some of the data movement aspects and how we deal with multiprocessing internally aren't super obvious on how to make it efficient. So it would be hard after having done it myself with a user who was also a fairly skilled engineer himself. It became clear to me that since we were having trouble with it, a variety of other folks who weren't as deep technically would also have trouble with it. And so this sort of non-obviousness of how to achieve some of these patterns with our software became extremely apparent. And they weren't apparent to me prior to doing this because I kind of already knew the solution to myself. So I didn't see the chain of events that someone else would go through, all mistakes that they typically make. And so having done it myself with them and not just explaining how one might go about it, it gave me a clearer picture of how someone that wasn't clear on how to solve these problems ahead of time might fumble and where they might go wrong. So it's really about seeing the whole end-to-end chain of events that a user is experiencing as they walk through a problem themselves. Oftentimes what we see as engineers is only the end result, only the pain that they experience. But it's good to keep in mind that the user tried many things before they got to that pain. And they may have taken like steps very early on in that decision tree that kind of led them into a strange part of the space. And so the pain that we're seeing when people are having trouble with the software is real, but it may not be indicative of what the root problem is. And so walking through it with the user helps us reconstruct that, maybe it's like some kind of Markov chain, help them reconstruct that chain of events so that we can better understand how it is they ended up at the pain.
Folks who are ML infrastructure engineers might be thinking, okay, but I don't really have a strong ML background. Like I haven't really done ML myself. What would you say to that? Why would it be important to have some ML background on an infrastructure team?
Yeah. Two comments related to that. I think it's good to have some folks who have a deeper ML background, and they should also be serving a role of education for the other folks. So I think that it's important to realize that I don't believe in really general engineers. There are many people that like to build things and like to tinker. But I feel like since we work on a machine learning platform, we need to be quite cognizant of the goal, which is machine learning. And just like a chef who tastes his own food, we need to like understand our own products. And chefs also understand the farm where they got their products from, and they're familiar with the whole chain. And so I think it's our responsibility to be familiar with that whole chain. Now, you may not have had 20 years of experience in applied science before you became an engineer. And so how can you go about that? Well, you can have individuals who do have applied science experience, and they can serve a role of education. You can pair with them. And I think it's also a wonderful opportunity for engineers who don't have the experience to experience the pain themselves, because since they haven't tried solving these problems themselves, it's a wonderful opportunity to like feel the whole landscape and actually experience what your users are experiencing.
We've been talking a lot about walking in the user's shoes, and that takes a lot of work. And we're an infrastructure team. We can't just hire more infrastructure engineers to work with every single project. So how do we take what we learn by walking in the user's shoes and scale and leverage that to many more projects and many more users?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the $1 million question, and it's not something I claim to have figured out. But the way that I approach it is I don't choose which project I work on by chance. So it's not just the first user that is having a problem. Many users I actually do say no to, like I'm not going to help you deeply on this project. And I think that's actually part of the responsibility of being a platform practitioner, is that I need to be judicious about which problems I choose to engage in and which not. And the reason that I brought up this Spark to Python project is because I saw it as an opportunity to learn things that I didn't know already. And it was also quite an extreme case at the scale end of things. So it really could like push my own assumptions. So I think a couple of things that you can do, you can look for problems that might push your own software, might push your own assumptions, or even be a domain which you're completely unfamiliar with, because those are, you can think of it as more as like information gathering. Think of what types of problems would give you the most information to help fill out your kind of probability of machine learning events. And that's why I chose that particular problem. Now, to the second part of your question, how do we scale it? This is where like the real struggle comes in. So you need to like digest the learnings. You need to somehow like mull over them in your head and think about how you can turn those itty bitty chain of pains into something that's a more cohesive story. And this is a bit of an art. It's also a bit of design. And I also do think it should be collaborative. So typically what I will do is distill my learnings into some sort of a memo that I think captures a broader audience than just the user that I was helping. I will circulate that firstly amongst my team, and then I will circulate it back with the user that I was working with. And that's really important because we now have a shared understanding of the problem, and we've built trust with each other because we both worked on it together. So this person knows that I'm presenting this memo to him or her out of true like honesty and wanting to solve problems for them because I've already tried. And that means that they feel some stake in the game to actually review it and give me meaningful feedback that would help their problem. So that's how we have been approaching it with Metaflow. And so far, it's helped us develop a variety of features that I don't think would be obvious to implement if we hadn't taken that approach.
Do you have any advice for teams that want to try this embedding model?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is realize that the responsibility of engineering is also to use your own tools, to dog food your own tools. And you can't really do any of what I just described unless you take that as a first-class citizen in your mindset for how to approach these problems. The second kind of element is having strong empathy. So the user is just trying to use their software. They actually probably don't care about your software. The biggest thing that they want to do is get their science problem done, and the engineering is only a tool to achieve that end. And so having that in your mind is really important. I think also having in your mind that everything that you do, every abstraction, every piece of software that you put out is as much of a liability as it is a help. It's asking something of someone. So you need to be very, very cautious of what it is that you're asking and how much pain that ask might cost.
Thank you so much, David. Remember the story of Megan Devine. Her job was to help people in grief, but no amount of talking to them helped make her more effective. By experiencing it, she was able to identify what are the right problems to solve. Walking in the shoes of your users is critical and encourage you to do it. Thank you so much.